to create some more content for you. He's talking about some directors he knows. These are the Teenage Film Snob hiatus shows.
Welcome to I Was a Teenage Film Snob. I'm James Chalmers, your friendly neighbourhood film snob. And I'm not sure whereabouts this episode is going to drop at the moment. But as you probably know from listening to the podcast, I'm on hiatus at the moment. My wife has hopefully at this point given birth to our second child. And so because I want to focus on my family, pardon me, I'm taking a bit of a step away from the podcast. So right now it's months before our child is due. But I figured I'd record a bunch of solo shows, so that way there's still content coming out. You'll notice the 90-second reviews haven't stopped. I record those way in advance anyway. I'm probably going to do a couple of shows with Nick Owen as well. So you'll find that even though maybe the content is less topical and less relevant to what's going on in theatres at the moment, we're still putting some shows out. I have asked Nick and Maddie if they want to run the podcast in my absence, and we're still at the time of recording figuring that out. So they may. You might be listening to this and being like, hey, ding dong, we know, we're aware, we're paying attention. But at this stage, it's still all a little bit up in the air. So just in case they don't record, or just in case I can't get some other episodes recorded with guests, because I am slowing that down as well as the due date gets closer. I'm making sure I'm more available at home and therefore not recording with international guests as much. At least there's something. But the question was, what was I going to do? What kind of content could I put out? If I can't make it topical, do I just do top 5 lists? They're a little bit less fun to do if I'm doing them by myself. Not that I don't... Look, I can fill an hour. You guys have listened to recordings of mine before. It's just me and a microphone for an hour, no problem at all. So I can do it. But the whole point of the lists is that I like talking to other people about their lists and stuff like that as well. But one thing we haven't done much with the show that I've wanted to do more of is talking about directors. So I'm doing a directors series. At least that's how it's starting, and whether it keeps going, TBD. Watch this space. But instead, I'm just going to talk about some directors that I like, maybe some directors who haven't had as much attention on the podcast as I would have liked them to, and I'm just going to rank their filmographies. This is obviously my personal opinion as of right now. If you're anything like me, your ranking probably changes regularly, as does mine. But I'm going to try and just shine a light on some directors who I maybe haven't talked about as much on the podcast that I would like. I'm trying to choose directors whose entire filmographies I have watched, so that way I can talk knowledgeably about them. And I just thought it would be a bit of fun. So we'll see how we go. So to kick it off, and again, this may not be the first one I drop, but at least in terms of recording, this is the first one I'm recording. I'm going to start with an American director, someone who has been around for over a decade, or closing in on a decade already, which is kind of insane to think, because his filmography is very, very short. But this is a director whose style is very well respected and admired, and whilst his filmography to some people might not be perfect and might have a few slips, there's no denying his visual style, his sense of time and place. Everything he does is period pieces. And he leans more into the noir, Gothic horror of it all, whilst not being explicitly horror films. I am, of course, talking about Robert Eggers. If you don't recognise the name, Robert Eggers has just 4 films to his name, 4 features. I'm only talking about features in this series. I'm not going to talk about TV shows. I'm not going to talk about short films, just talking about features. And Robert Eggers just has the 4. He started 10 years ago with The Witch, a New England folktale, which I'm very excited to talk about. His sophomore effort was The Lighthouse, starring Willem Dafoe, Robert Pattinson. His third film was his first movie. Actually, no, I was going to say his first movie in colour, but The Witch is in colour. It's just very dark visuals. His third movie was The Northman, starring Alexander Skarsgård. And most recently, the one that everyone is talking about, or was talking about at the time, was Nosferatu, the reinterpretation of the 1920s rip-off of Bram Stoker's Dracula. So I've chosen him first simply because he's got such a short filmography, and it'll allow me to spend a bit more time on each film, hopefully. but also because he's probably a director that if you're a cinephile, if you're into the business, if you're into the art of film, you probably know his name. But if you're a more casual moviegoer, you might not be, and he might not be your thing traditionally. So I thought, given that he's not everybody's cup of tea, he might be a good place to start. But if you're not into Robert Eggers, don't worry. I'm going to do a bunch of these. I'm going to talk about the films of Edgar Wright. Edgar Wright's my favourite director of all time, and we haven't got to talk about him much on my podcast at all. Our podcast, I should say. Rob Zombie, I want to talk about his entire filmography. Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith has been severely underrepresented on the podcast, considering how much I love his films and how much Clerks changed my life. There are a bunch. Eli Roth is another one. I've got a whole list of directors we're going to come to. So if Robert Eggers ain't your cup of tea, there's more on the horizon. But I would encourage you giving it a go and listening in, because maybe you haven't given their films a shot, or maybe you haven't given them a second chance and you'd like to go to it again. So as with everything on this podcast, it's all about being positive and just trying to encourage people to try different things and give things a second chance. So without further ado, I'm not sure. Not very cultured, I am. I'm going to rank the films of Robert Eggers. Now, this is my ranking today. My ranking could change. I should also point out that half of his filmography I have only viewed once, whereas the other two I've watched a few times. So that comes down to personal taste, comes down to which films I like the best, but also just in terms of me trying to manage a watch list and give everything as many viewings as possible. So with Robert Eggers, I haven't seen all of his films multiple times, and that will, of course, impact the ranking as well. So to start it off, in fourth place, I'm going with The Northman. The Northman is a period piece. They're all period pieces about a Norse warrior who basically gets left behind and is trying to find his way home. It stars Alexander Skarsgård. It stars Nicole Kidman. I can't remember the entire cast, if I'm being honest. And like all of Eggers' films, visually it is stunning. It is one of the most gorgeous films you've ever seen. In fact, all four of these films are some of the most gorgeous films you've ever seen. The reason it ranks low, honestly, is I just don't remember too much about it. You know? I can't point to a single thing that made me love the film. I enjoyed watching it. It is quite long and it is quite slow-paced, as most of his films are. And it is a visual feast. But I just can't think of any single thing that kind of jumps out at me as being like, wow, what an amazing flick. Not to say it's not a good movie. You know me, I'm very positive about all films. But look, it's brutally violent, but it is slow. And it does feel like it's quite long as well. I can't remember. Maybe it's not that long, but I remember it being long. That's about it. I sort of going to use this time to spend heaps of time talking about the films. I just don't have much to say on The Northman. It's definitely overdue a rewatch, and I will go back and check it out at some point, probably while I'm, raising this baby. So I'll probably go back and check it out. But The Northman, as I said, it's cool to look at. The fights are cool. I just can't think of anything distinctive about it that makes it deserve a higher spot. I should point out, Eggers has made 4 great films. They're all great. This one I just have less affinity with. But if you haven't seen it, I definitely recommend checking it out, because it's nice to see him step outside of his comfort zone. It's definitely the brightest and most colourful of the films. That's not saying much, of course, but it is the brightest and most colourful. And it's a revenge story. There's a lot of that as well. And I think ultimately one of the reasons why it's a little bit lower is at the time I felt very confused watching it. I don't think I quite understood what was going on at times, and that probably, suggests that maybe I need to rewatch it as well. But visually, cannot fault it. And yeah, those fights are really brutal and really, really cool. So The Northman's at number 4, but as I'm doing this, as I'm recording this, I'm thinking maybe I should have watched them all before I did a podcast, but that's fine. By the time this comes out, hopefully I will have rewatched it. If it has, I'll put in my notes that I've checked it out again. Which brings me to number 3. Number 3, I am placing Nosferatu, the 2024 reinterpretation of the 1920s German film. And I really enjoyed Nosferatu. I think I enjoyed it more than most people. I know a lot of people found the film to be very, very divisive. They didn't quite... I don't want to say they didn't get it, although a lot of people were saying they didn't get it. I don't think the film is overly complicated, but I do think it is long and slow, which is Eggers' style. It does make slow-paced films. I think what, again, really makes this film pop are its visuals. And he used a lot of old-style filmmaking techniques. He used paintings and illustrations to help show the backgrounds as opposed to constructing sets, which I really appreciated. And it has that distinct 1920s Gothic style that you come to expect from a film like this. So visually, again, cannot fault it. I really enjoyed the performances. I know that's something that came under fire. People thought some of the performances were a bit hammy, a little bit cheesy. I really enjoyed them, specifically Lily Rose Depp, who I do think was snubbed at the Oscars. I do think she should have got, not only should she have got a nomination, I think she probably should have won. I do think she gave the best performance of the year. The way she moves around the screen, the way she convulses and controls her body, even the dialogue. Well, the dialogue isn't that creative or exciting. That was a critique that the film drew. But I think with a movie like this, the dialogue is the least important part. But what she did on screen was incredible. I really like Bill Skarsgård as Count Olaf. Count Olaf, not Count Olaf. Oh, no. I thought his presence was really fascinating. I thought the makeup was incredible. It did not look like Bill Skarsgård. And Bill Skarsgård has been getting a reputation in Hollywood as being the next kind of rubber mask guy. He's been playing clowns and horror villains, and it's very easy to kind of get typecast and fall into a certain mold. But this was nothing like we've seen him before. And his performance was really fun. I really enjoyed his kind of Germanic, Hungarian-inspired accent and the way he moved around the screen as well. I also really enjoyed Aaron Taylor-Johnson. I know people had their thoughts on him and thought that he was underutilized. That particular role doesn't, it's not asking too much. And that's not to undersell or underplay his performance. I think his performance is good. But he's not a lead role. He's meant to be mostly scared and outraged and worried, and that's what that character's supposed to be. Nicholas Hoult, I really like. Willem Dafoe, I really liked as well. But the absolute star of that film is Lily Rose Depp. I also really like, spoiler alert for a year-old film, that they really lent into the tragedy of the film. It wasn't as much of a romance as Dracula tends to be, but it really did lean into the tragedy, and especially when you get to that third act and that finale, you kind of see how tragic the whole story has been, and this kind of sense of helplessness and hopelessness, which you wouldn't maybe expect from a movie like this. Or you go in expecting it and then end up being disappointed because they didn't stick the landing. A thing with modern horror is, especially American modern horror, is that they want to give you a happy ending, and this film doesn't have that, which I really liked as well. So I really like Nosferatu. I do think it's a fantastic film. I think it's very underrated, but I just think Robert Eggers' other two films are stronger. So let's move to number 2 of his very short filmography. I think people will probably know where I'm going with this, considering the types of films I'm into, but this may surprise people, because I think my number 2 would be a lot of people's number 1 for Robert Eggers. But at number 2, I'm putting The Lighthouse. The Lighthouse is a film that I've seen a few times. Obviously the last 2 I've only seen once each. The Lighthouse I've seen a few times. I do find it hard to watch. I think whilst it's not the first of Eggers' films to go with a very specific type of dialogue to the time period it's set, I just find this one harder to watch. I find the characters very unlikable. There's no real heroes in this film. And shooting it in 4:3, using those grinding, droning sounds in the score, it really amps up the feeling of madness and isolation. And I just think it's a very uncomfortable watch, but not uncomfortable because of what's happening on screen, although there are things on screen that are uncomfortable to watch. But just as a viewing experience, I think it's very, very uncomfortable. And it's designed to be that way. You're not meant to sit back and relax with this film. It's not one you kind of nestle into the couch and enjoy, for lack of a better term. I think you can enjoy this film, but not in the traditional sense of like, hey, that was great, I'm having a fun time. This is not a fun movie. As with all of Eggers' films, this is another really visually interesting film. I think it's probably the least visually interesting of the 4. And I think that comes down specifically to the location. there's only so much you can do with the lighthouse interiors and the lighthouse exteriors. There's not much more there's only so much you can do. With Nosferatu, you've got all of the Carpathian forest and these old castles, and you've got these, villages and stuff like that. There's a lot you can play with. The Norseman, it's this sprawling kind of epic journeyman adventure. So you get the backdrop of, where he's kind of roaming, and then you've got all these little villages, and then the witch, which we'll get to. Again, there's a lot going on. So the lighthouse being so isolated, there's less to play with, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it's visually very, very good. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. The performances are excellent. Both Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson are wonderful in it. Just very unlikable and very maddening, and it's a film that I've watched probably 2 or 3 times, and I don't need to watch it that often because it doesn't leave me feeling happy. I always walk away from it feeling, as I said, very uncomfortable, very unsettled, and looking for maybe something a bit more cheery or fun to kind of pep me up afterwards. But it is a masterpiece, and that is why it's at number 2. Well, we're getting to the very end of what's turning out to be a very short podcast, but hey, at least it's something. You're getting a little bit out of me, and that's good. The final film, through process of elimination, you will have figured this out by now. My number 1 Robert Eggers film of all time is, of course, 2016's The Witch. And I know it's very on the nose to have someone's debut film as the number 1 on your list. I promise you this might be the first and only time in this series I'm going to do that, because I know, Edgar Wright's filmography. Shaun of the Dead is his first film. That ain't my number 1. So there's a little tease for upcoming films. Rob Zombie, his first film is House of a Thousand Corpses. That ain't my number 1. Another tease. Can I tease anything else? Eli Roth, his first one was Cabin Fever. Love that film. It's not my number 1. I don't think. Maybe it is. Nah, I don't think it is. So whilst, a lot of people, especially in the film community, are like, oh, of course the debut film is your number 1 film. This is actually a rarity for me. Love it when a director has a strong debut, but I love it when they build from that, and you can track the building blocks. And Edgar Wright, who we'll get to in a later episode, is a perfect example of that. You can follow his journey from film to film to film and see exactly what he learned where and how he implemented and improved on it in follow-up films. He's a very distinctive director for that sort of thing. But enough about Edgar Wright. We'll come back to him. We're focusing on Robert Eggers. We're talking about The Witch. The Witch is a masterpiece. I love The Witch. It's a really, really well-made film. It's really bleak. It's got fascinating characters. You've got Ralph Ineson, who you may know recently as playing Galactus in Fantastic Four, but in this he plays the father of an excommunicated family. This family lives in New England. They were part of a village or part of a commune of sorts, and when their oldest daughter is accused of using witchcraft, they're kicked out and they have to settle down and find their own place to live and survive on their own. Their eldest daughter is played by Anya Taylor-Joy, and I want to say this is her first theatrical role. I could be wrong, but it's definitely one of her earliest performances. Definitely the one that kind of put her on the map. It was this, and then a couple of years later she did Split, and that's when people started to notice her. In fact, I think it was a year later. I think it was The Witch and then Split, and Split really kind of helped her explode. But this was the first one. And so they're living on this kind of farmland, and they're just trying to make a go of it, and they're trying to support themselves and live off the land and work off the land. And odd things start happening. Violent things start happening. The mother is pregnant, and has to give birth at a certain point, and something horrible happens to that baby. I won't spoil it for you, but let's just say it's very extreme. It's very unexpected. You don't expect to see that in a kind of a mainstream film in the 2010s, but it happens. There is a possessed goat, a goat called Black Pete, and he may or may not contain the spirit of Satan. It's just incredible. Like all of Eggers' work, it is slow-paced, it is quiet, it takes its time, but I am never bored in this film. There's always something going on. The performances are absolutely incredible. Visually, You could not ask for more. I think I would put this as the first film to kind of really launch the genre of quote-unquote elevated horror. I don't think there's much that came before The Witch, and maybe I'm wrong, and if I am wrong, tell me in the comments, or, shoot me a message on Instagram and tell me why I'm wrong. But from my memory, I think this is the first real major film in that wave of elevated horror. They kind of, with the advent of A24, the film company, we started seeing this new kind of more thinking person's horror, which, by the way, I'm not a huge fan of people using that phrase. Horror is horror to me. Like, it can be a thinking person's horror. It can be a mindless splatterfest. It can be elevated. It can be, I don't really mind, like, as long as it's good, I'm happy. And, but I do think this kind of came first, and then we saw movies like Hereditary and Midsommar, and all these other kind of interesting Thoroughbreds. I think Thoroughbreds was around this time as well. But it's just beautiful. It's just a beautiful film that also happens to be very horrible and unsettling and gross. But this is the flick that kind of put Eggers on the map. This is the one that kind of let people know what kind of storyteller he is, and I adore it. I think it's wonderful. This is a film that also you don't need to watch every year, but even though I only watched it maybe a year or so ago, I do feel like I'm due for another watch. So I might have to watch that, preferably before my baby is delivered. But yeah, I think maybe that's all I have to say, in the end. That was only 20 minutes. I thought maybe I'd go a little bit longer than that. But I guess when you've got such a small filmography and the guy hosting the podcast doesn't watch any of the films before recording, sometimes you just run out of things to say. But that's what I got for Robert Eggers. He's not my favourite filmmaker. Not that I don't like him, just he has a very distinct style, and his films don't beckon as many rewatches. I am looking forward to rewatching The Northman again. I am looking forward to watching Nosferatu again, and the others as well. But Lighthouse I've seen the last year. I probably didn't see Lighthouse for a little while now. But some of the other filmmakers I'm going to be talking about soon, I watch their films a lot more frequently. Edgar Wright, I watch one of his films every year, and the others probably every other year easily. He's a really fun filmmaker to talk about. So Robert Eggers, an interesting one to start off with because he's probably the one I'm the least knowledgeable about, but I do like his films. I do like that he pushes the envelope. I do like he is a bit of an outsider in terms of his storytelling and filmmaking style. And I would 100% recommend you checking out his work. If you have not watched the films of Robert Eggers before, I would maybe recommend starting, well, it depends. If nothing bothers you, if you're cool with unpleasant films, if you're cool with being uncomfortable, I would definitely recommend starting with The Witch. That is the one that I would start with and then work your way through there. If, however, you're kind of dipping your toe and you don't want to feel super uncomfortable, but you want to get an idea for the style and feeling of the filmmaker, then I would probably actually recommend Nosferatu. I think that would be a good place to start because it's not overly violent. It's not overly unsettling. It's a more gothic fairy tale as opposed to a straight horror film. And I would say that's true of all of his films. He hasn't really made a flat-out horror film. Like, even The Witch, it's not scary as much as it is unsettling. So if you like horror, if you can handle gore and unpleasantness, start with The Witch. If not, start with Nosferatu and work your way from there. But he's a wonderful filmmaker, very, very talented, and has been an interesting contributor to the scene for sure. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. I'll have another episode next week talking about another filmmaker, unless, of course, I manage to sneak a few more interviews in which case, you'll know, you're the listener. You'll find out where we're up to. But thanks for listening. Don't forget to support on all the socials. We're on all of them, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Reach out. Don't be surprised if I don't respond to stuff because, as I said, I'm raising a young baby, but we'll have more content coming out for you regularly during my hiatus. Thanks for listening, and as I say on this podcast every week, guys, I was a teenage film snob, but I'm trying to be better. I'll see you next week.